Generally through the course of the year I tend to fish in, or carp fish in spells, but because I do all types of fishing, I tend to go hard at it in spring, take a bit of a step back through the summer and do quite a bit more in autumn, and then when it comes to winter I tend to take a little bit of a step back. I had a busy year last year with the World Championships and various other bits of fishing going on, so it got to sort of mid-November. I pretty much knocked it on the head for a little while. I've got a full-time job and a couple of kids and a family to keep happy as well, so I really enjoy spending time with them. So I've not gone fishing for a couple of months, but as always, there's always a period where you get a nice warm spell and it just feels like you should be fishing. In sort of 6-8 weeks of not doing any carp fishing, I always get that itch and I just need to get out and have a go at catching a winter carp. You know, like most people, I've got a full-time job, and I can't just drop everything and go fishing at the drop of a hat when the weather comes in good. I have to plan my trips and book my time off of work, you know, weeks in advance. And so I set a date in the diary for the 3rd week of January to get out and try and get the rods out and try and catch a winter carp. So the weather's been really unpredictable this winter. We had that couple of weeks of really mild weather, and then I've booked my trip in for the 3rd week of January, and true to form, the weather has just dropped off the face of the earth and we've had a really, really cold snap come through. It was mental really. It's gone from being like double figures, southwesterlies, banging conditions, the best conditions you could ever wish for in winter, to just dropping off and plummeting off the face of the earth to sort of minus temperatures. And I don't know about you, but I always feel that when you're out on the bank, it always seems 2 or 3 degrees colder than the weather forecast or in the built up areas, you know. So yeah, the run up to the session, it just went really cold for the week before, and we're talking -6s, -7s, even up to -9 in places. Yeah, that really wasn't the best build up to the session. During that real mild spell, carpy conditions in January, the first couple of weeks, a couple of my mates, Ryan and Brad, had been down to a place called Bramblemere up in the Cotswold Water Park, and they were catching some real nice scaly bangers, you know. The weather was perfect, they were catching them, and I just fancied a go. It's a venue I'd not carp fished before. I had been round pike fishing. One of my mates, Steve, bought the lake quite a few years ago now, and I've spent a bit of time pike fishing and perch fishing it, but I'd never really got into the carp fishing, so decided to book that trip in for the 3rd week of January, got all booked in, and as I said, a week before, the weather just dropped off the face of the earth, and you know, I'm buzzing to be going fishing, you know, and I'm opening the weather app and looking at it, and it's saying sort of -4, -5s every night, and then come morning on the way to work, my temperature gauge is showing -8s and -9s, and the whole landscape was just frozen solid. You had like icicles hanging out of trees. It was brutally cold in the week before. You know, I was really excited to be going fishing, and I found myself waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, opening the curtains and just checking out to see if there was a frost, and every single time it was just solid. So I feared the worst, but I was almost in denial. You know, I was so excited, it can't freeze. There's no way it can freeze. I got that dreaded text message the day before. Kev, the lake's just frozen over. I was gutted, you know. I've had all the bait was ready, I'd ordered it all in, I'd been shopping all the food, I was practically almost loaded. I was absolutely gutted. So with the lake being frozen, I cancelled my day's holiday that I'd booked off at work and rescheduled it for the following week. The weather forecast looked like it was going to be bang on, you know. It was cold for a few more days, but it looked like it was going to warm up midweek, and I was just found myself constantly checking that weather app, and every single day that warmer period got pushed back a day and got pushed back a day. In my mind it was going to defrost, there's no way it wasn't going to defrost. So as the week progressed, that cold snap just lingered like a bad smell. It was just looking less and less likely that the lake was going to defrost. I actually had a couple of days holiday that I had to use before the end of the month, so I'd booked the Saturday off. The Sunday and Monday are my normal days off, and I'd booked the Tuesday off as holiday as well. And it comes Saturday and it had warmed up ever so slightly, and I say ever so slightly, it was actually like 3 degrees. And I'm sat there thinking, I really hope this lake is defrosted, and I just had to go. So I dropped Steve a message, the owner, and I said, is it defrosted? He said, not really, but there's a little patches starting to come ice free. So I just loaded the gear up and just headed down and thought, I'll chance it, you know, better than just sitting at home. I just need to get out and fish. and I've got down to the lake sort of midday on the Saturday, and it is frozen solid. I chucked sort of a stone out there and there's no way that it was going to be broken up. So I hung around for the afternoon, and the ice just did not retreat. So tail between my legs, I've actually headed across the road to Welford Pools just to have a look at sort of the option of doing a night on there, but that was half froze as well, and there was a couple of people on the area that wasn't froze. So I've headed home, and actually the weather actually come in quite warm through the night. I say warm, it was 2 or 3 degrees through the night, and then the following day the weather was due to warm up. So on the Sunday I've headed back down at 11 o'clock in the morning, and there's areas that are just sort of like in front of the point where the ice was free up to about 50 yards, and the weather was warming up rapidly. And yeah, so it was starting to look good basically, and that ice, as the day went on, that ice just started retreating and it all went to slush, and then in a couple of hour period in the afternoon it all just disappeared. The first part of the lake to sort of defrost was the road bank and some of the point swims. So I decided that seemed like as good a shout as any to sort of set up for my first trip. You know, I don't know anything about the lake whatsoever. I don't know what swims do fish, which areas are better. I didn't really know the depths. All I knew was there was a slight gentle breeze sort of pushing into the far bank, so I was off the back of the wind, and I knew all that ice melt was going to be over on the far side, so I felt like the far side, the water temperature was going to be a lot colder. So setting up where the ice melted the quickest seemed to be like the best option just to get me started. Those birds have helped smash it up as well. They're chasing each other around, smashing the ice up. Warmed up. First thing I've done is got the marker rod out. Like, I don't really know anything about the lake. I've got an inkling that it's quite shallow all over. I don't know the spots, I don't know what the bottom's like. So the first thing I want to do is get the marker rod out and just have a cast around. Just from feeling for a drop, you can sort of gauge the depths roughly. And also I'm looking for a real hard spot. I love to fish the clear areas and the real hard spots. And if it's quite a weedy lake, and I can find a real hard clear spot, you generally tend to be cleared off by the fish feeding. So that's what I started looking for. So I'm having a good cast around in the swim. Well, my first cast of 2023, and it's landed in a weed bed. I found a couple of areas that I've got a harder drop than others. But on the drag back I was pulling back quite a lot of debris and a lot of dead leaves. Nice donk there. When I'm plumbing around in a swim, I always start off with a normal lead just to get a feel for the lake bed and everything. And if it's really weedy, then I'll continue with that lead until I find what I think's a clear spot. But in this instance, didn't seem to be that much weed about. So as soon as I've got the drop and it seems quite clear, then I'll switch over to a grappler lead, because that tells me so much more about the bottom than what a normal lead would. And exactly that, I've cast out the grappler lead, I got the perfect drop again, and when I dragged it back, I could just feel that it was a lot more choked than it was with the normal lead. Bit more of a solid drop there, a lot harder than the further right I'm going, the harder the drop I'm getting. Not completely clear, just little strands of weed, and it's not too bad. No silt there, so definitely gravel, but just a few strands of this. I'll go a little bit further right and see if I can find a spot that's just a little bit cleaner again. And in my experience, that just means that although it is a hard spot, because it's covered in leaves, for me, it just shows that that spot hadn't been fed on. So I decided to explore the swim a little bit more, and then all of a sudden I've got the mother of all donks. It just went down with a crack, and I just thought, oh, this feels like pretty decent, you know, this feels like a feeding spot. And then I've just dragged the lead back, and it is just skidded across the ground. Bearing in mind, I've had quite a few casts and everywhere was a bit choddy. This particular spot just seemed absolutely perfect, and I just thought instantly, this is a feeding spot. That is created by fish feeding, it is that clean. And then when I dragged the grappler lead in, much to my surprise, it was just dragged in maggots. Definitely a spot that's been fished before. Don't know if you want to show that or not. That's quite worrying though, because it's not been eaten. And that just blew my mind, to be honest. The lake's been frozen for 8 days at this point. and I knew the guys that had been fishing it before that it froze, they'd been using maggots, so that bait had been out there for 8 days. Well, I found a lovely spot out here, probably about 50-60 yards out. Donk, proper nice drop on it, and I felt that's going to be a feeding spot. That's a dinner table, that's clear because it's been fed on, but something has just thrown a spanner in the works. Nice and gravelly there, lovely. But last cast, I've just dragged in a maggot. Now that concerns me a bit because the lake has been frozen for 7 days, hasn't been fished for 8 or 9 days now. So if there's still a bit of bait out there, I don't know how to look at that really. There's a couple of things to think about. Maybe they're just not eating the maggot. Maybe there was just a bit of maggot stuck in the gravel. Maybe they want some proper grub. Maybe they haven't fed at all. I don't know. It's maybe I'm in the wrong area. I don't know. There's so much going through my mind right now. You know, one little maggot on the grappler lead is just completely thrown it out there. I could be in the wrong place. It could just be a rogue maggot that's still just sat there. I just don't know. I'm going to have to really sort of consider my options here, and I'm going to have a few more casts on the spot, see what it feels like, see if I drag in any more maggots. If I drag in loads, then I know that there's quite a lot of bait out there that's not been fed on, and it's probably going to mean to me that this isn't the swim to be in. But yeah, let's have a couple more casts and see what we find. I think under normal circumstances, if the lake wasn't frozen, the birds would have almost certainly just dived and mopped it all up because it's not that deep. So I think the fact that the lake was frozen, the fish weren't feeding, the birds weren't diving on it, and that's the reason that the bait had been sat there for quite a long period of time. That's 3 casts out of probably 8 that I've dragged back bait, so I know there's quite a lot of bait. So I've got a decision to make now. I'm pretty sure that the fish aren't feeding on that spot. So they're either not feeding on that spot or they're not feeding on maggots. So I've either got to try and find a different spot in the swim, or I've got to move to a different part of the lake. So for the last few weeks, I've been sat there just dreaming about catching these carp, or these carp mooching about under the ice. When I dragged those maggots in, I think that was the point that the realisation just dawned on me that this was going to be a difficult trip. There's every chance that those fish hadn't fed for 8 days. And that bait being on the bottom just confirmed it. So that was really playing on my mind. And as I said, I just felt that that was just going to make my session even more difficult. In my mind, I just felt like I should just pack up and move. But I had a quick cast around with the lead again. I found it was still cleared, like 2 or 3 rod lengths further out. And for some reason, I just decided to stay put and fish 2 or 3 rod lengths further out to stay clear of that bait. But I had that niggling feeling in the back of my mind, and I should have gone with it. But to be honest, I didn't know the lake. I don't know the lake at all. So where would I have gone? I don't know. I would have just been packing up and setting up in another swim. And I know that the whole lake had been fished the week before, so there could have been bait in other swims as well, you know. So I decided just to stay put for the night and fish a couple of rod lengths further out, start a fresh spot and just see if I could get a bite. As the evening drew in, I got the rods out and I felt a lot better, you know, because the rods are out, they're in place and I'm fishing, you know. I've been dreaming about this for quite a while. It had been really cold, it had warmed up. I even had the mandatory robin just bob into the swim and just linger around where it had been frozen for so long. I think even he was hungry and he was nibbling on all the little scraps of bait that I dropped, and that was really nice to see. And I was just quite happy, but I always had that niggle in my mind about that bait that was out there, and I just felt that it probably wasn't the one, but the rods are out and, you know, I was happy, I was fishing. I'm up at first light and I've probably confirmed what I already knew, and I've not had a bleep through the night. You know, I wasn't really confident going into the night with that bait lingering around. It was playing on my mind big time. And I decided just to give it a few more hours in the morning, just to see if anything would happen, or just to see a sign, you know. If I'd seen a fish in the area, I would have known that I'm in the right area, just hang it out. But generally, if I've done a night and I've not had a bite, 9 times out of 10, I'll always pack up and move somewhere else, because I feel like I've bought my A game, I've tried my hardest. If I can't get a bite, I don't like to just sit there and just hope that something's going to turn up. I like to make it happen. So I kind of knew that I was going to pack up and move. I gave it a couple more hours, and as it happened, a fresh wind sort of picked up. It was a little bit chilly, but a fresh wind picked up into the far corner. And not knowing the lake, I didn't have anything else to go on, so I just decided to have a bit of a pack up and head round and move swims and just get on the end of the wind, just see if that wind would push a few fish into this corner. And it just seemed like a good plan at the time. I just had to get out of that swim, so it was time to move. I think with the ice melting, the water temperature is at its coldest point it's ever going to be at. And I think it would be quite easy just to sit there and say it's switched off and you're just not going to get a bite and use that as an excuse. But I like to always be a bit optimistic. I always feel there's a bite to be had one way or another. Whether I've got to move swims to get on them, whether I've got to change tactics, change bait, I always feel that there is going to be a way that you're going to catch those carp or a carp. And I think you've got to believe that, because you could easily just sit there and use it as an excuse in blank. But if you genuinely believe that there is a way of catching those carp, you'll always put that extra effort in to move or to change tactic or to try something different just to get that bite. You know, I always believe there is a bite to be had, no matter what the conditions. With the weather warming up through the day, the wind was just starting to push into this nice reed line corner, and it really did look good. So I thought I'd go and have an explore in there with a lead. So I've had a chuck out and felt for a drop, and it was a lot deeper than I first thought. It felt like it was about 10 foot or so. So to be honest, the deeper water in the winter, wind pushing in there, reed line bay, it just felt good, you know. Once I got set up in the swim, I had this little niggle in the back of my mind about zigs, you know, were the fish off the bottom, were they just milling about, were they going to feed? And I kind of toyed with the idea of putting a zig out, and I probably should have reacted on that and put a zig out, but I found a really, really nice spot about 8 wraps out, and it was really deep, and the further out I went, it was a bit shallower towards the reeds, but I just felt that it was such a lovely spot. I decided to put all my eggs in one basket, and it was getting quite late in the afternoon, so I'd done my usual, put 3 on a spot, again 5 or 6 bombs of bait out over the top, and I went into the evening actually feeling really confident for the first time in the trip. You know, rods are set, the wind's pushing in, the scene is set, it is looking good for a bite. Even though it was fairly warm at night, like 2 or 3 degrees, which was a hell of a lot warmer than what it had been in the build up to the session, I felt like I had a real good chance of a fish, but unfortunately I woke up first thing in the morning, not a single bleep. So I've got quite a lot of questions going through my mind now. It's the last morning on the last day and I've not had a bite. So I'm kind of thinking, am I not on the fish? Are the fish there? And I had that little niggling feeling again in the back of my mind saying, are they just off the bottom? So it got to about 8:30 in the morning. I'd felt that bite time had probably passed on the bottom. So I decided just to chance it for a few hours before I packed up and just put a couple of zigs out there just to see if there's a few fish about and off the bottom. My gut feeling was I was probably just not on fish, but I put 2 zigs out, 3 or 4 foot zigs in sort of, it felt about 8 or 9 foot, maybe 10 foot deep of water. So I felt like probably just mid-water is where they might be if there are a few about. And I just cast 2, probably 2 or 3 rod lengths past the bait, just scattered 2 zigs out there and just went back to the bivvy, and within 5 minutes I was absolutely shocked. I've just had a single bleep and it's just, the left-hander's just pulled up, and it just, as it just started to take a little bit of line, I've hit into the rod and I'm into a fish. It's just absolutely shocking really. You know, 5 minutes that rod was out there. You know, I've sat there for 48 hours without a bite on the bottom, and I've had a bite within 5 minutes on a zig. I knew right from the off that it wasn't a very big fish. You can just feel it nodding. It's almost tench-like, to be honest, but it took a bit of line, so I knew it was a carp, but it just felt really small. And when it popped up, it kind of confirmed that. When I got in the net, it was probably one of the smallest, if not the smallest fish in the lake. I know they'd netted the stock pond a few weeks before, and I was speaking to Steve about it, and he said they might have just slipped a couple of small commons in there because there's not many commons in the lake, and yeah, I've only gone and caught one of them. But do you know what? It was a quick bite, and it was a real key part of the jigsaw, you know. Getting that first bite on a new lake just gives you that confidence to go on and hopefully catch some more. Well, I'm not no Terriern, but that is the hardest earned fish, small fish, I think I've ever had in winter. It's got to be one of the smallest fish in the lake, but it's a little beauty. You know, in years to come, that is going to be one stunning carp. So I decided, I brought all 3 rods in, rechucked them all on zigs, and I've just scattered the zigs about just to see if I can search out another bite. And lo and behold, an hour later, that same rod is gone again, just dropped back straight to the floor. Just had a stinking drop back. He's probably been out there about 30 minutes now after that littling. And I've connected to what feels like a better fish, so fingers crossed we can get this one in. I don't know whether it's because it's been a while since I've played a carp, but it did feel a lot better, and it kited left right out of the bay. Oh, it's grating through a weed bed. Don't like that. Now, when I'm fishing zigs, I always fish 12-pound double strength, and it is mega strong. It has got me out of a lot of tricky situations, so I put quite a lot of pressure on and managed to get it out, and I was back in contact again, but we managed to get the fish in the back of the net. And although it wasn't the big one that I first thought it was a nice sort of mid-double mirror. And you know what, it was the second fish of the morning, and if I hadn't chucked those zigs out, I would have 100% blanked. It finally feels like we found the key to unlock this trip. You know, it's been a tough old session. I could have easily have just sat there sort of saying they're not having it. I have got a few hours left to go, and hopefully I can catch 1 or 2 more on those zigs. But do you know what, I've worked hard for this one and the little small one before, so I'm pretty pleased if this is the last one I catch. But you just never know in this game. Getting out there in winter, giving it a go, working hard, keep bringing the changes, and we've got a couple of carp on the bank. So I slipped back the second fish and got the rod back out on the spot, and I only had a couple more hours left, and nothing happened for those last couple of hours. But do you know what, I've had a couple of fish, so I'm absolutely buzzing. Not quite the big scaly banger that the lake holds, but it just fueled the fire, made me just want to come back. So before I left, I went and seen the owner, and I managed to secure another night the following week on the Sunday night, just for an overnighter. During the week, on the build up to that night, the weather was banging. You know, we had 8 degrees temperatures in the day, and it was sort of 2 or 3 at night, which was really warm compared to the build up to the previous trips. Then the inevitable happened. The day before the trip, or the night before the trip, it just dropped off really cold and went down to like -2. There was a group of anglers on over the weekend, and they had a few fish, and it was looking really promising. But as I said, that weather just dropped off, and it left me sort of thinking, is it going to continue fishing, or is it going to be hard again? So I've got down, I've had a good look around. There was quite a few fish caught off the point to the left of where I was fishing, done my first night on the last trip, and that seemed like an option. It would have been really easy to have just dropped in after Brad on the point, who'd had quite a few over the weekend, you know, probably all too easy. But you know what, I just wanted to do my thing, and I knew that the corner that I'd had those 2 fish out of before, it just hadn't been fished. You know, I think there was 5 or 6 anglers on, and no one fished in that corner. So I'd been thinking about it all week, and I just decided to go straight back in there and hopefully pick up where I left off on my last trip. So again, I got the rods out, I chucked some zigs out for the afternoon. It got really cold really early. There was ice forming sort of straight after dark really. As the night was going on, I was just becoming aware that time was being eaten up, and I'd not had a bite, you know. And I just didn't think it was going to happen, in all honesty. It was just so cold, it was ridiculous. But then first thing in the morning, I've had that single bleep followed by a few more, and I just knew I was into a fish. Straight down onto the rods, and it felt good from the off, to be honest. It plodded around. It didn't take loads of line, but it just stayed deep and just plodded around. Now it's probably 8 or 9, 10 foot deep, and it just kept hugging the bottom basically. It took quite a while to get in. It come into the margins quite quickly, and then it just stayed plodding around, and when it popped up, I've managed to net it first time, and it was an absolute beauty, and just the winter whacker that I was hoping for. How about that for a winter carp? Let me tell you, it's absolutely Baltic this morning, -4 degrees. And when this one tanked off, I just couldn't believe it. It was so cold, you know, picking up that rod with ice on. But I'm not going to complain, because we've got a beautiful Cotswold 27-pounder, and that is a right result, because didn't think I was going to catch, to be honest. But yeah, what a result. So after returning that fish, it really was cold and my hands were just felt like blocks of ice, and I was just sat over the stove just trying to warm up again. And I just had that real sense of accomplishment, you know. It wasn't easy, but I've got there in the end, and I was just buzzing, to be honest. I ended up with 3 and 3 nights, which isn't a massive result for the lake, but given the conditions, do you know what? I could have easily have blanked, so that was a right result. And although I didn't catch one of those scaly fish that the lake's really renowned for, I certainly know I'll be back next winter for another attempt at catching one of those. Well, it definitely warrants flipping it over and taking a look at the other side of this one. That is exactly why we come out to this wonderful venue in the Cotswold Water Park.
Good boy. Good in.
You can't neglect the offer of staying an extra night when you're fishing for fish like this, and I'm glad I did now, because I've had one in the night, and then this morning this one is tanked off as I'm packing up. Yes, and that's a wrap.